We are accustomed to using several words, but the words have not do not have much significance in themselves or by themselves. The words are not significant that way. A conceptual idea, a kind of mental perception appears to be as though it has these three qualities. It is not that each one is separately presenting itself to us. In expression, down below, at a lower level of our consciousness, that tremendous sense of being and unity and self-awareness and completely filled with what is called as Ananda is expressed as Sat, Chit and Ananda. Because there's a possibility of a wrong mental construct being there, thinking that if we experience it, it will appear as Sat, Chit and Ananda as three circles or three lights or three something. No, there's no three at all. The triplicity in nature is actually a matter of expression down below. That's all. See, except for unity, in fact, as in one sense, Sarvepalli Radhakrishnan says, unity is also a concept down below here. Unity, when you're saying unity, it's not as though that it's all one and appearing as like one. It is the very existence of it, the very being of it is oneness. So if we talk about unity, duality, triplicity or whatever it is still a mental construct only. How do you define something which is indefinable? How do you express something which is inexpressible? How do you deal with something which does not indulge in any kind of transactional arrangement? So it is important not to bring down certain experiences into the grosser level and make what is very subtle as a gross expression here. See, in everything that Godhead manifests itself, and it finds an expression here below in a myriad forms. In innumerable forms, it finds an expression. And what happens in the human consciousness is anything which is elevating helps us in moving in the right direction. That is why, you see, in spite of our own limited human frailties and our own follies and several aspects are there, like greed is there, self are not elevating by themselves. They do not help us in elevating ourselves. Actually, they bring us down. Why do we look up to something? We look up to something so that it is elevating and we can move in that direction of becoming more and more sensitive and more subtle. That is why he says, it is the Godhead who manifests himself in the great thinker, the hero, the leader of men, the great teacher, the sage, prophet, religious founder, saint, lover of man, the great poet, the great artist, the great scientist, the ascetic self-tamer, the tamer of things and events and forces. The work itself, the high poem, the perfect form of beauty, the deep love, the noble act, the divine achievement is a movement of Godhead. It is the divine in manifestation. This does not mean that all that is ugly, all that is selfish, all that is debilitating is not a part of it. It is a part of it, but what is it that we need to give importance to? All the persons mentioned here are elevating and we look up to them. For example, a great thinker, the hero, even in mundane activities, even in worldly activities, if some physically challenged lady has reached the topmost point on Mount Everest, that's a heroic deed, isn't it? So it may appear to be a worldly activity only, but still, as he said, it's a movement of Godhead and the divine manifestation down below here. And that thinking is elevating. It may inspire some other people also to take up that challenge. If somebody is in mountaineering, somebody likes mountaineering or climbing mountains, it will be an inspiration to such a person. Similarly, the leader of men, the great teacher, sage, prophet, religious founder, saint, lover of man. You see, so many people involved in the service of mankind. They are lovers of humanity. And the great poet, the great artist, the great scientist, the ascetic self-tamer, one who is, trying to tame himself, purify himself. So all these things, the divine achievement is a movement of Godhead. It is the divine in manifestation. So this is what we need to see. And he brings out the other dimension which I just talked. This is a truth which all ancient cultures recognized and respected, but one side of the modern mind has singular repugnances to the idea, sees in it a worship of mere strength and power, an ignorant or self-degrading hero worship, or a doctrine of the Asuric Superman. Certainly, there is an ignorant way of taking this truth, as there is an ignorant way of taking all truths. There is this possibility. Some may denigrate these things, but that's what Aurobindo says. You are taking it in the negative sense. You are assuming that to be something which is an ignorant way of looking at it. But then he says it has its proper place, its indispensable function in the divine economy of nature. The Gita puts it in that right place and perspective. As I mentioned earlier also, the Gita very beautifully provides for the right kind of a place for evil. For evil, it gives a provision. Some people who may otherwise be very intelligent, very smart, very intellectual, could be evil. We see those examples day in and day out in our lives, in our workplaces, in our political scenario, in the economic scenario. Otherwise, very smart guys, very capable, very educated, very talented. But what is the problem there? The problem is this ignorance. This ignorance is what we call a spiritual blindness. This ignorance, per se, to some others may appear as, how can you call that fellow an ignorant person? We can call him as an ignorant person only to the extent that he is spiritually blind. And he has a place in it. Because actions of such ignorant people allow the exhaustion of karma of other people. You see the beauty of it. The action of an ignorant fellow will have a repercussion on those who are striving or struggling on the path of spiritual progress. So he is a means for exhausting the karma of these people. Without him, his karma would not have been exhausted. It could be a direct relationship with that person, whereby the influence is much more, or it could be a very indirect way where the whole of the economy or the whole of the system is affected, and we are also as a part of the system get affected. Like political decisions. Decisions taken at a very high level have an impact on everybody, isn't it? Suppose tomorrow the government of India or the state government or somebody says, I am going to remove income tax. it will affect millions of people, millions and millions of people. It will have an impact on them. Or if they impose something else, if they impose some other tax or something, again that has an impact. So you see, these are all actions within the framework, and ignorance has an appropriate place, and that's why he said the Gita puts it in that right place and perspective. There's nothing to get disturbed severely. So, and he emphasizes this point. Aurobindo goes on to emphasize this point and says, God must be seen and loved in the ignorant, the humble, the weak, the vile, the outcast. Here he has talked about the great thinker, the hero, the leader of men, the great teacher, sage, prophet, religious founder, saint, lover of man, the great poet, the great artist, the great scientist, and all that. Equally true is the statement that God must be seen and loved in the ignorant, the humble, the weak, the vile, the outcast. You have to see this. So when you say it manifests in all and everything, it literally means all and everything. You cannot question and say, no, do you mean to say that mass murderer is also included and is a part of this? Very much so. Very much so. Leave him to his karma, but having murdered 100 people, he might have relieved the karma of so many others in the process. But that could be a very wrong way of looking at it from a social or a political or a judicial perspective. That has its own place. We can't allow mass murderers to roam freely. They have to be booked, they have to be brought to justice. But from a larger spiritual perspective, he is also a part of the whole system. There is nothing outside the system as such. That is what is important. And in this also, in such a case also, the general direction of movement of evolution is always on an ascending scale, he says. But this does not abrogate the fact that there is an ascending scale in manifestation, and that nature mounts upward in her degrees of self-expression from her groping dark or suppressed symbols to the first visible expressions of the Godhead. So the general direction of evolution is ascending, is always upwards and moving in the right direction. That is why the what is called as sometimes referred to as the inner government or the divine plan provides for this in the sense that it will not, it is the whole the governance is done with consummate skill and efficiency and always meant for spiritual progress only. Suffering therefore is in one way inevitable, but if we do not learn from it and move in the right direction, we will only be adding to the suffering, adding to our suffering. Suffering is in one way, see, if you see, most of the religions say this, which may outwardly appear to be something gross and something wrong about it. But the fact of the matter is, suffering is in one way a purifying agent from a spiritual perspective. From an ignorant perspective, it will drag you down further into that suffering and further wrongdoing. But if you are oriented spiritually, see, it's not for the heck of it that the Buddha said that dukkha is the first noble truth. Dukkha is essentially suffering or evil. That is it's a fact. It's a noble truth that is manifest in this world, and that is on account of our own ignorance. It is not something which is imposed externally on us. it may appear to be, somebody may appear to be as the cause for my suffering. Somebody may appear to be the person who has inflicted suffering on me directly. But the cause and effect law is something which applies equally to everybody. Nobody is exempt from it. It applies to everybody in its field of operation. So this does not abrogate the fact that there is an ascending scale in manifestation, and that nature mounts upward in her degrees of self-expression, starting from groping dark or suppressed symbols to the first visible expression of the Godhead. See, this is the providing a proper place and perspective for everything is something which is unique to Sanatana Dharma. It is something which is very, very unique to the Indic culture and civilization, for the simple reason that, you know, the what I should say is, see, it flows out of ignorance, and it has a natural place in the manifestation of things. In the manifestation of things, it has a very natural place of it, and that is because in the Sanatana Dharma, the ultimate reality is said to be both transcendent and immanent. In most other cultures and other civilizations, you find that God is treated to be outside the system. And therefore, they cannot provide for a proper place or perspective for the manifestation of what is called as evil or dukkha or ignorance. But the very explanation of the existence and providing the right place and perspective is because God is immanent. The whole of the 10th chapter, it is about divine manifestations. And that's the reason he says, I manifest in the cheat, I manifest in the gambler, I manifest in the vile. Because the systemic provision is such that the starting point is avidya or ignorance or nescience, as they call it. So when limitation is imposed, it is bound to bring all these factors into expression. So that is what one has to understand. And he continues to say, but man has not reached his own highest heights of self-exceeding, and meanwhile every hint of a great power of the will to be in him must be recognized as a promise and an indication. So every hint that is given in this manifestation of that divine will and the power of that divine will must be recognized as a promise and an indication. Otherwise, there is no redemption at all. If this were not to be there, there won't be any redeeming feature, isn't it? And therefore, the concept or idea of eternal damnation or eternal hell is ridiculous. It is ridiculous. See, if just because a person is acting out of ignorance, you can't condemn him forever, isn't it? Do we do that with our children? Do we do with children who are ignorant? What is it that we do? We pardon them. So there is a redeeming feature. So it is only to create fear in the minds and hearts of people that these ideas of eternal damnation, eternal hell, and there being no end to this suffering because of our ignorance, is only a kind of instilling fear to do the right thing. But that's not
It
the
is
way.
just not only that. This eternal damnation is clarified further in the divine plan when you read.
Yeah.
Because the soul is stuck for the whole solar manvantara.
No.
So
See,
that is a period. So to indicate a long period, the word eternal is used.
that is understood, sir, in one way. But when there is no acceptance of the principle of reincarnation, then what you say is right. See, this is a
Of
flow.
reincarnation. It is independent of reincarnation. Anyway, we'll
No,
discuss that
it can't
separately
be.
when we meet.
No, it can't be independent of reincarnation, because reincarnation is every time an opportunity to move in the right direction. But eternal damnation is you are not providing for an opportunity for moving in the right direction at all. See, do the Abrahamic religions accept reincarnation as a fact in nature? They don't accept.
Chapter 16, if we read, clarity comes.
No. No, I am asking a very specific question, sir. I'm asking a very specific question about acceptance of the fact of reincarnation in nature. Is it there or not there?
It is
If it
very
is,
much there in a different way.
no, it can't be that way. The emphasis should be that. I can't hide it somewhere and say that if you understand it, that will come. No. The understanding of it should be the focusing on what is important. It should be the focus should be on the importance of an opportunity being provided to everybody, irrespective of what he is or what he has done, through the process of karma and reincarnation. If that is not accepted, or that is hidden somewhere, then you are actually like throwing the baby with the bathwater. You're simply discarding the baby also. That is the reason. Otherwise, this concept of eternal damnation or eternal hell, or what is called in the this thing as taqayamat dozakh. That means up to the end of this, as you said about the solar manvantara, you are cast into the fires of hell, which is not true. Which is not true at all. That comes into focus only when you accept the principle of or the fact of reincarnation, and then only there is this element of redemption. And I am also trying to put another question, that there is no external redeemer. There is no external redeemer. There is only a redeemer within you. The externality is only to provide some kind of support. The externality, even of Sri Krishna, is to provide some kind of support, which is in other terms called as grace. But grace does not simply descend on somebody who doesn't make any effort at all. Somebody who can see even these false ideas have crept into, unfortunately, what is now called as Hinduism, which itself is a misnomer. There is no term like Hinduism, but later medieval and later Hinduism has provided for this, and there were all kinds of stotras and mantra and chantings and poems which say that I am the most vilest of the being, therefore I have first preference. What nonsense is that? Do we do that in our daily life? If somebody comes and that I am the most laziest person, I am the most grumpiest person, and I am the most useless person, so employ me with the highest pay, would you say that? Would it work for one day in this world? Can you run the whole world if on this principle for one day, saying that I am the most efficient fellow in this world, I have no knowledge, no nothing, and all the ills you find in this world are there in me. Therefore, you make me the CEO of this company or make me the president of this country. It won't happen that way. When it doesn't apply to the mundane life, when it appears ridiculous and foolish in this world, how can you assume that it will be valid in the higher realms of consciousness? The occult esoteric truth is as above, so below. As above, so below. So that is how it works. So non-acceptance of a fact does not make the fact vanish away or simply wishing away. I cannot wish away and say that, sir, in my religion or my understanding or my philosophy, there's no place for reincarnation. And then say that on top of it, say that because there is no reincarnation at all, there is eternal damnation. Does our system of law permit that? The juvenile law, what happened? Just because that fellow, the rapist in Delhi, was a few days or weeks or months, less than 18 years, he has been tried under the juvenile law and released also, whereas the other three have been hanged. What is this? The philosophy of this law is that up to a certain age, you are not really aware of the consequences of your action, and therefore you should be given a chance to live. The same spiritual law applies in the spiritual field also, where it says that you might have done the worst kind of things. But what is the basis for doing that? Ignorance. So you should be given a chance to redeem yourself. That is important for us. There has been a lot of misinterpretation in it and a lot of hiding in it. And if you read the Christian history, prior to 5th century AD, the concept of reincarnation and karma and reincarnation have been very much prevalent. It was the conscious decision of a pope who said that if you allow this to be propagated, then nobody will be in our control. Nobody will come to us. And this is, I am telling you something which is recorded history. I forget the name of that pope of the 5th century AD. It was an edict saying that we will condemn the belief or the concept of reincarnation in all respects, because the secret agenda is that people will not come to me at all. This is what even, you see, this is not condemning a particular religion. It is there prevalent in our religion also. In Hinduism also they have degraded to it. That's why there is this proliferation of so many gurus. Because somewhere inside man believes that this fellow is going to redeem me, is going to help me. So if I hang on to him, I'll be saved from eternal damnation. And everybody encashes it. The fellows encash it. But where is the Redeemer sitting? The Redeemer is sitting in you. There is no external Redeemer. You are the Redeemer. You alone can redeem yourself. If it is a fact, it is a fact. If it's not a fact, it's not a fact for anybody and everybody. The question of you and my believing in reincarnation is also foolish. In the sense, our belief has not spurred us to do the right action. Jiddu Krishnamurti used to always question this, whether which religion you belong is immaterial. What you believe is immaterial. If it is true, if I really consider karma and reincarnation to be very much facts of nature and true, then how careful should I be in every action of mine from this moment onwards? From this moment onwards, I should be tremendously careful, tremendously conscious about it. And there would be an immense transformation in it. But is it there? It's not there. So what does it mean? It means it's only a concept or an idea or a comforting belief for you. The fact of this has been clarified right in the beginning. In the second chapter itself, he says, Nasato vidyate bhavo, na bhavo vidyate sata. Asat has no bhava and sat has no abhava. If it is true, it is true. If it is not true, nothing in this world can bring it, make it true. So that is the emphasis. Now, as a culture, as a civilization, if you propose and foster ideas which are imposed upon you. Now, see, lot of studies have been done where they have found that a majority of Americans believe in reincarnation. The majority of Europeans, in spite of being, officially belonging to a particular religion, they themselves have declared that yes, we believe in reincarnation. Why? Because that's a rational explanation. That's the only rational explanation. Forget about the truth of it or other things. Whether it is true or not, we can't go on debating it here. But they said that's the only rational explanation.
But the whole approach of spirituality and the teaching with Atma Bodha and the Gita and all is not to reincarnate.
No, that is precisely what I'm saying. It's not about not to reincarnate. It is about coming out of this dukkha. That not reincarnating is a bonus, sir. Is actually an unintended gift. See, most of us would like to very much live in this world if we do not have this sorrow attached to it. If I am totally free of sorrow, what does it matter or how does it matter where I am? Whether I am born or not born is of no consequence at all. So it is not the question of not reincarnating. It's a question of coming out of this sorrow. That is more important. So as a consequence of that, you are out of this compulsory cycle of birth and death. So and the consequent developments of what we called as purification and exhaustion of karma as the two major factors is unless there is purification, you would not come to a state where you are in a position to exhaust your karma. If I purify myself, the first thing should be I should get rid of any thought of hitting back, taking revenge, being vengeful, or tit for tat. Once you are out of this, imagine how much of your karma will be unloaded. You have offloaded a major part of your karma. I am not disturbed whether somebody abuses me, somebody beats me, somebody does anything to me. I am not disturbed. So a great amount of the karma which I would have otherwise done is simply not there now. It's offloaded. So the purification leads to exhaustion of karma. So this is a very subtle aspect one needs to understand very carefully. Therefore, you see, he goes on to say, respect for the divinity in man, in all men, is not diminished but heightened and given a richer significance by lifting our eyes to the trail of the great pioneers who lead or point him by whatever step of attainment towards supermanhood. Arjuna himself is a vibhuti. Because Arjuna himself is a vibhuti. He is a man high in the spiritual evolution. A figure marked out in the crowd for his contemporaries, a chosen instrument of the divine Narayana, the Godhead in humanity. In one place, the teacher, speaking as the supreme and equal self of all, declares that there is none dear to him, none hated. But in others, he says that Arjuna is dear to him and is bhakta and therefore guided and safe in his hands, chosen for the vision and the knowledge. There is here only an apparent inconsistency. The apparent inconsistency is that one place he says there nobody dear to me. Nobody, I hope. No Priya, no Apriya. And at other place says you are very dear to me. This appears to be self-contradictory. Even in the 13th chapter, which I was reading yesterday, and I think it is chapter number 11 also, there are two verses which immediately contradict each other. They immediately contradict each other. But that contradiction or that inconsistency, as Aurobindo says, is apparent. So you see, the point to be understood is what is the essential factor one needs to learn from these divine manifestations given in this chapter. And continuing about Arjuna, Sri Aurobindo says, Arjuna has reached that point when the veil can be rent and the embodied Godhead can reveal the mystery of his workings to his vibhuti. It is even essential that there should be the revelation. That means all that is said in the 10th chapter is a precursor to the 11th chapter. What is the 11th chapter? Is the actual divine manifestation, Vishwarupa Darshana. Here,
so it is preparedness, Krishna Paniji, it is the preparedness of Arjuna which led to the revelation of the divine Vishwarupa.
Yet it was not adequate preparation on the part of Arjuna, because he did not have the vision himself. Sri Krishna had to give him the vision and then show him the Vishwarupa, and then he could not sustain it for long. He says, please stop it, I cannot bear this. Because it is not his own power.
Yes.
It is not what he has developed himself. It is a borrowed power.
Yes.
You know what happens when there is a borrowed power? You can't sustain that power. Like a high voltage surge in a low voltage system, what will happen? It will create fire or it will burst. So he said that because he found him to be the only right person in the circumstances given. This was, see, there was an interesting thing about H.P. Blavatsky also. About the Theosophical Society's formation and all, there are a lot of literature and then other things which goes on to say that why did the masters choose H.P. Blavatsky for this work? Because in so many respects she was imperfect. She was very fickle-minded. She was very unpredictable, and she was prone to outbursts. She would throw tantrums, she would throw things, she would behave in a very unpredictable manner. And over and above that, she was addicted to smoking cigars. And she would, her place of work would be in a mess. Then when some through the letters from the masters of the wisdom or some other context, somebody asked that why did you choose her? Then they said, for our purpose, at that particular point of time, we found her to be the best possible person available, that's all. She is not the most perfect person, but the best possible person, that's all. So you see, Arjuna in that context was the best person available for Sri Krishna to reveal this Bhagavad Gita. He is not the most perfect or most eligible. There could be somebody else, but the context and the location is more important. The purpose of that divinity is to see that all these adharma is curbed and all these fellows are supposed to die. So a scheme of things are in place where he appears to be the most appropriate person, not most perfect person. So so it was even then this fellow was reluctant. Even then Arjuna was reluctant and still had doubts in his mind about fighting or not fighting, about victory and defeat, and whether he's still doing the right thing or the wrong thing. Therefore, he had to be again after revealing the divine manifestations in everything around him, which was not sufficient. He had to reveal his Vishwarupa also to convince him. Vishwarupa, he had to assume that to convince him. Like that is precisely what happens to us every day, in and day out, sir. We are blind to so many things and we can't recognize a good person unless he appears or he or she appears in a form acceptable to us, conducive to us, and convincing to us that he is a good person. We don't accept, isn't it? Some of these movies and all, there are some comedy scenes. In that comedy scene, one comedian is praying to Brahma, and suddenly Brahma appears. Then this fellow says, sir, normally it is said that one has to pray for 10 years or 12 years to have a darshan of yours. How come you gave me a darshan in 2 days? I think you are not the Brahma. I don't believe you are the Brahma. He says, yes, sir, why are you? I am Brahman, the Brahma. You prayed for the creator to come and have come. He said, no, sir, I still have a doubt about you. No, show me some powers. Then he has to show some powers to him. Then he says, okay, for the time being, I accept you, sir. But you give me these following boons, and I will test my boons and see whether they work or not, and then only I will believe you. So this is the problem with us. He has to appear in a form which we imagine. When somebody says Vishnu Murti, he should appear with 4 hands. Anybody with 2 hands, not acceptable. Isn't it? So this is the human conditioning of the mind. And therefore, we miss out so much in life. We miss out so much in life that we don't find goodness around us. And as the saying goes, you find what you look for. If I am looking for bad around me, I will see only bad around me. If I am looking for good around me, I will find only good. So this is the inner preparation that is required. And again, I am reminded of Professor Ravi Ravindra when he says, it's not a question of understanding, it's a question of withstanding the truth. Understanding the truth is an intellectual pastime. But withstanding the truth is an actuality. Or whether you are really able to withstand the truth when it appears before you. So therefore, it was essential for Sri Krishna to show the Vishwarupa Darshana, because he had to completely convince him. But having convinced him, again in the last chapter he says, now you are free to choose. Again, he did not impose his choice. He says, whatever I could give as Sri Krishna, I have given it to you. Now it is for you to decide whether you want to fight or don't want to fight, or what you want to do. The final choice is again yours. Then he says, all my doubts are cleared, everything is cleared, sir. I'll only follow your advice and completely surrender to you, and I'll do what you want me to do. That is the factor, that is the important factor which we have to recognize. So you have to come to that on your own. Somebody can point out certain things to you, but you have to tread the path, you have to come to it on your own. And that's why the last point which I am going to make here from this chapter, he says, he is called to self-knowledge. He is referring to Arjuna, or generally the person with that vision. He is called to self-knowledge. He must see God as the master of the universe and the origin of the world's creatures and happenings, all as the Godhead's self-expression in nature, God in all, God in himself as man and as Vibhuti, God in the lowness of being and on its heights, God on the topmost summits, man too upon heights as the Vibhuti, and climbing to the last summits in the supreme liberation and union. You have to come to it. He is called to self-knowledge. The very important statement. These statements are like mantras. He is called to self-knowledge. And who can give you self-knowledge other than yourself? Any knowledge given by anybody, even if it is Sri Krishna, is only external knowledge. I have to come to it on my own. And he says, God in the lowness of being and on its heights. Time in its creation and destruction must be seen by him as the figure of the Godhead in its steps. Steps that accomplish the cycles of the cosmos, on whose spires of movement the divine spirit in the human body rises, doing God's work in the world as his Vibhuti to the supreme transcendences. So now he says, this knowledge has been given. The time figure of the Godhead is now to be revealed, and from the million mouths of that figure will issue the command for the appointed action to the liberated Vibhuti. That is the Vishwarupa Darshana is going to have. And they very beautifully see the subtlety of the term. He says, time figure of the Godhead. That's the most important point. God in manifestation. What is time? How do we understand time? If you have seen the, Mahabharata serial, which has been retelecast recently, I am told. I don't have any means to see that. But I remember very vividly that the serial starts with showing a wheel going round. And in the background, there is a speaker who says that I am Kala, that I am time. Because all manifestation is within this space and time. Space, time, and causation. These are the three aspects that are there in manifestation. And how do you see time? It's a very important thing. We take time for granted. But it's not so. Time is seen by us as a succession of phenomena. If there were to be no phenomena occurring around us, we will not be able to see time at all. Suppose I am confined in a closed room where nothing is moving, nothing is happening. My sense of time will be lost after a few hours or few days. Even for few days, it only sustains because if it is not completely closed, you will be able to make out whether it is day or night. But suppose you don't allow any external light to enter at all in that room. After a few hours, what happens? You will lose the sense of time. Why? Because time for us is a conscious factor where it appears moving or progressing because of the succession of phenomena. The sun is rising, the sun is setting, things are happening, clouds are moving, birds are flying, animals are moving, human beings are there. There is activity. there is what is called as a succession of phenomena. That is time. And what happens when we are in deep sleep? We had deep sleep and we wake up. What do? Just before going to sleep, we might have vaguely remembered at what time I have gone to sleep. After waking up, we see the watch. We see the watch. Oh, I slept for 2 hours. So the first thing we do is to see the watch to know the passage of time, because there is no other means to know. There is no succession of phenomena in that state. So do we see this? And that's why beautifully see, unless we have that insight into things, that there is a possibility of losing out in why Sri Aurobindo said the time figure of the Godhead is now to be revealed. Time figure. Now think about it. Think about this term. What does he mean by time figure of Godhead? Because that's the only thing you recognize. In the phenomenal world, we recognize the movement of time through the occurrences of phenomena. And that is what he wants to reveal to him. What does he reveal actually? He has revealed so many things, but one thing that struck Arjuna was that all these people were dying and rushing to move into the, rushing to fall into the open mouth of the Vishwarupa. Literally rushing to their death. All the fellows in the war were so eager to die, but they did not know. That's the Vishwarupa is shown. Then he says, yeah, I am able to see everybody rushing into your mouth just to fall into it and die. So he had a vision of the future. Then he was convinced, right, now I am convinced all these fellows are dying and are going to die. And luckily, I don't see myself in that process. So therefore, I am not dying. And now I am full of confidence now. Yeah, I can fight now because I know that in future, I will not die. Still, there is that selfish element in me. Just a revelation. See, again and again, one thing has to be very clear, sir. Even if God comes down and reveals himself, the effect of it will be temporary and will be for a few short hours or days only, unless you come to it on your own. Krishnamurti also says the same thing. You have to come to the truth. I am there. I am there to walk along with you. But when will I walk along with you? Unless you come to me. I can take you on a personal journey, even from a mundane or worldly point of view, I can take you on a personal journey. But when you join me, when you don't join me, how can I take you anywhere? So it is for you to come. Do you mean to say that Sri Krishna did not know about it? He knew very well. See, my only purpose is to somehow convince this fellow to fight and finish the job. Because there is another secret. Fortunately or unfortunately, he gave a word to Duryodhana saying that I am not going to wield any weapon. If I don't wield a weapon, how are these fellows going to die? So I have to find a fellow who is going to wield the weapon. And who is the most suitable fellow? Arjuna is the most suitable fellow. So there is a mutual requirement. Mutual requirement is Krishna had to complete this job of killing all these fellows. And unfortunately, he made a commitment and he gave a word that he is not going to wield any weapon. So he had to depend on Arjuna. And Arjuna had to depend on Sri Krishna because if without his dependence, there is a possibility or a great probability of his losing the war and dying in the process. So he had to assure him that you will not die. Then he will give an assurance that okay, I will fight. So see the human nature, we can drag down Godhead also into our transactions. We can drag down the Godhead also into our transactions and mutually enter into an agreement and finish this job. But the ultimate reality is not that. Godhead in manifestation as an avatara, yes, he is also coming to limitations and he'll operate through that. But the ultimate reality doesn't brook any of these things. You can't enter into a transaction with it. You can't enter into a deal. That is the point which has to be known. And that's the reason why this divine manifestation is revealed to him. And which is not sufficient. In the next chapter, he has to reveal himself in a much larger perspective as the Vishwarupa. So this effectively completes this 10th chapter. Next week we can move on to the 11th chapter and take up the
Thank you,
Vishwarupa.
Pradari sir, for giving great clarity.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you. Any questions we can have? We have another 10-15 minutes.
Ji, this
Yeah.
sentence, I think this is such a beautiful sentence. He is called to self-knowledge,
Yeah.
which means that when you say he is called to self-knowledge, it doesn't only apply to Arjuna, but all of us. There is a
Yeah.
grace that is pulling us upwards at all times. No?
And the beauty is we are pulling it downwards.
Yeah.
We are resisting. We are resisting it.
Correct.
If we even at a very low level, even if we open up ourselves and allow to be taken, uplifted, it would be very great. It would be very beneficial.
Right.
But unfortunately, we are resisting it and we'll pull back. We will be holding back, and that fellow has to use much extra force to pull us.
To pull us. Yeah.
Yes, sir. Any further points? Meena Nirula ji, Suman Goenka ji, Umesh ji, Ramchandran ji, Sajani ji, Advani ji, Manjula ji, anybody? There is one Miss Anu and Miss Aruna also. Prema ji is also here. Patamal ji. So any other
Right.
point we can? Yes, sir. Umesh ji.
Hello, sir.
Yeah.
Haji.
Yes.
You mentioned about the last chapter where the Lord says, I have passed on all that wisdom to you, but finally it is your call and
Yeah.
you need to decide action or no action.
Yes.
So, which means he is offering or asking Arjuna to use his free will.
Yes. No, discretion. See, earlier he has told him also.
Is there a
Sir,
is there a free will?
Yes, there is. I told you, we earlier, if you remember, this question of free will is a wrong question. We are putting a wrong question. See, here, what he is saying is free will in the sense, in the larger perspective, there is no scope for what you are thinking. You have initiated certain actions, and the consequences of that action will be there. And the consequences you cannot avoid, isn't it?
Correct.
See, you and I are not starting afresh, sir. You and I are not starting afresh. So we are starting with a lot of baggage. So we are already conditioned to act in a certain manner. So
Right.
thinking that acting within the conditioning to be free will is a misnomer, is a wrong thing. See, I am permitted. See, if some person is imprisoned, okay, he is put in a cell. Now, is he free or bound?
He is bound.
How? Within the cell, he can move, no? Anywhere.
Yes, but that's a limitation.
So we have also limited ourselves that way. We are in a bigger cell. And thinking that within this area of my movement, I have free will.
Agree.
Now, see, Sri Krishna is a great strategist and tactician also. You are assuming that Sri Krishna is only Bhagavan Uvacha and is every time it is said Bhagavan. He is the avatara. He is in truth the Godhead. But he is a very great strategist and tactician also. Very tactically he is saying, I have given whatever I could give to you, because beyond this you can't receive it also. He didn't say that second sentence. The first sentence, when he says that I have given what all I could give, it doesn't mean that he is limiting and saying that my capacity is over. He is saying your capacity to receive is over. You understand? Iti te jnanamakshyatam guhyat guhyataram maya vimrushyaitad asheshena. I have said exhaustively I have given to you. Okay? Exhaustively I have given to you. Does it mean that my capacity is over? No, your capacity to receive is over. And as I said, he's a great strategist and tactician, because unless there is a force within you which makes you fight, any amount of artificial inspiration will not work. You understand? Therefore, so very diplomatically he says, Yathechasi tatha kuru. Do as you deem fit, taking full account of it. Vimrushyaitad asheshena. Vimarsha means to analyze. Analyze it and take it everything fully into consideration and you decide. When you say you decide, all of us, do we not feel happy about it that I have been given the choice, sir? I have been given the freedom and all that. Do we feel that or not? Sir, please do as you like. What does it mean? But even an ordinary psychologist will tell you that even if I ask you to do as you want to do and you have full freedom, I know that because of this fellow's conditioning, he will only do like this.
Plus, he is under the spell and the.
So don't be enamored by whatever I have said. Don't be influenced. I'll say 100 things to influence you, and at the end of it, I'll ask you not to get influenced. That is the way of a tactician. He's a great psychologist also. He's a very great psychologist. He says, if this fellow is drawing inspiration from me, there could be some point where that inspiration will end. But if he is drawing inspiration from within himself, that is an inexhaustible source of inspiration. So Sri Krishna is a great psychologist also. He is a very great tactician and strategist also. So don't take him for a fool or think that he doesn't know all these things. He knows he knows every damn thing about him and everybody else also. But if I impose, that's why one of the statements of the masters of the wisdom is, if we impose anything upon you to do, a part of that karma will come to me also. So I am not interested in that karma. I don't say that you please do it like this. If I give you clear instructions to do something, then the karma of that will come to me also. So I am not interested in that. You have to do it. You take the decision now. You decide upon it, because the karma will be yours. That is see, you can't underestimate. See, every statement of Sri Krishna has got so many shades of meanings. So many shades of meanings. He's a very smart guy.
But so should we take it this way, that in reality, for people like us, it is always a destiny and not a free will?
No, you are confusing. Please don't put that question at all, sir. Don't put that question at all. The question is, within your limitation, you have freedom of operation. It is like a dog tied to a leash. Within the length of that leash, the dog can move anywhere.
Okay.
So unfortunately, we don't see the leash that is attached to it, which is our own conditioning. So within the conditioning, we will operate. And again, yeah.
So, giving a personal example, if I sitting wherever I am, I choose to be online and to have the gyan from you. Is that my choice, or is it my, let me say, destiny or karma?
No, see, within the field of operation, you have chosen to do it. You had an opportunity to do 10 things, right?
Yes.
No, within that choice, within that limited choice, you engaged in to do this. That's all.
So who makes that choice, sir? Who makes?
You are making that choice. You are making. No, you are making that choice. Don't bring every time God or somebody into it.
No. For me would mean, is it my mind or my
limited
impressions?
Yeah, the limited conditioned entity called Umesh Dhagat is the one who has made the choice within this field of his operation. That's all. Don't link it to destiny or free will. I told you last time also, these are questions which have emerged from a Western mind. The Eastern, the Indic philosophy doesn't subscribe to this at all, because they know that I am conditioned and I operate in conditioning and ignorance, and I am bounded by that, and I am bound to reap the consequences of it also. See, why do you think this question of destiny and free will has come? You know the secret behind this nonsensical thought? The secret is that if I say it is destiny, I am free of guilt. I am not responsible, no?
Okay.
So I am free of guilt. If I say free will, then I am bound by the consequences of it. So the mind plays a subtle game by saying that destiny means I am not responsible.
Actually,
Free will means I am responsible.
Actually, what I meant was this, maybe my choice of word was wrong, but what I meant was spending 60 minutes together with all of you, listening to the wisdom. Is it a cause or is it an effect?
It is both.
As far as I am concerned.
It is both. You see, we live in this world of cause and effect. See, the effect of you are coming here, the cause is that you heard me earlier, and whether for good or bad, you liked it. Right?
Yes.
So that cause has produced this effect. This effect will lead to another cause.
So it is both.
So it is both. See, it is we are caught in this entanglement of cause and effect. The transcendent reality is something beyond cause and effect. So destiny and free will is the question which talks about this is a wrong question that is being posed. The fact of the matter is, look at ourselves. Let us look at ourselves and see in how many ways I am conditioned. See, there could be today at this point of time, there could be a very important international conference webinar on higher mathematics. Why did you not attend it? Because you and I don't have any knowledge about the subject at all.
True.
So that's a
True.
limitation, no?
True. Very true.
And there could be a very beautiful program going on, they're demonstrating all the various, alcohols and liquors that are available in this world, and a beautiful demonstration webinar could be going on that subject also. That's of no interest to me.
True.
Isn't it? So I may not have the knowledge.
That's
I may not
precisely
have
what
the-
happened today, sir.
See, I love to
That's
watch a
precisely
cricket
what-
match and listening to you.
Yeah, fine, wonderful. See, it could be both. If some interesting match is going on, you will mute this webinar and see that. If there is an interval in between, you will you will
India
stop.
match is going on, no? Australia-India match.
Actually, it is going on. Australia today is the second day. Yesterday, our fellows did not fare well, and we are hoping that they will fare well today and all. Huh? Okay. So you see, this is the problem. So you have to understand. Yeah.
Answer is, it is both. It is a cause as well as effect.
Effect, and more importantly, it is conditioned by the limitation within which we are operating. It is conditioned. And as I said, the wrong question, why I said it's a wrong question is, I want to absolve myself of responsibility and guilt if it is destiny. If I am destined to do it, I may take it as, yeah, anyway, I'm not responsible for it and I'm not guilty about it, because I'm not into my, it is something which happening with forces beyond my control. But that's a wrong way of looking at it. You can't be the mind is very cunning. The mind wants to be in a state of this thing where it does not want to take responsibility and not feel guilty and not ready to take the consequences of it.
So here, there is a deep-seated desire for something which we opt for, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. You see, it is so hidden and so subtle and so cunning.
Yes.
That desire, we don't allow that desire to express itself in so many words also.
Yeah.
Because it is inconvenient.
Yes.
That's what happens.
Acha, sir, this last verse, the 42nd verse. So the last verse, can you just brush through that?
Which last verse of?
The 10th chapter. Athava bahunai tena.
Why? See, what he says is, why should I talk anymore? There's no need to go on talking about this anymore, because athava bahunaitena kim jnatena tavarjuna. Wherefore should you know so much of all these things? Why do you need further elaboration on this? Encompassing this entire world by a fragment of my power, I abide eternally. Vishtabhyaham idam krutsnam ekamshena sthito jagat. By a small fraction of myself, I pervade this whole of manifestation and then limiting. That's all. It means don't ask me to elaborate further. I have given you enough about this divine manifestation, and that's the end of it. So we'll stop it here, and then one simple thing I am telling you is, with a small amsha, a small fragment of mine, I am pervading the whole of manifestation.
Beautiful.
Okay, sir. Thank you. There is some chat. Anuji says, thank you, Krishna Pandit. Thank you. You have just pointed out how selfish we are even in our so-called spiritual quest. Yeah, this is where we have to see ourselves. That's where the true insight comes. I heard that Sri Krishna was 90 or 100 years old when Mahabharata war was happening. Is that, see, these are all, what happens is some calculations have been given saying that he was quite old by that time and he lived up to 120 years and he lived further to that. I recently read some information about some calculations which said when was he born and when did this happen and all that. But as an avatara, you don't age as you think you age. For an avatara, the aging process is not so important. because they have, it is only for them, though the birth appears to be natural, the energy operating through that body is something totally different. So we need not bother much about how old was he.
We can't hear.
Sorry, you are able to hear?
Yes,
No,
yes,
it's
yes.
only a question of good for our quiz. As a quiz question, it is good to know how old was he, when was he born, when did he die, and all that. Not of much of a consequence. What is important is whether what he said makes sense to us and whether it is relevant or not. Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah, Mr. Krishna Paniji.
Who is this 1, 2, 3, 4? I am unable to make out.
Mr. Krishna Paniji.
Yeah,
Suman here.
Yeah, 1 minute. So 1 minute, Sumanji. There's somebody where I'm not able to see the name. It only says 1, 2, 3, 4. Number participant. It only says who has put this chat just now, which says thank you very much, sir, for nice clarifications for questions on destiny and karma. I don't know the name of the person because only the number as 1, 2, 3, 4 is being. Yes, sir. Yeah, what's your name, sir?
Srinivas Murthy.
Oh, Srinivas Murthy. Okay. Your name is not displayed here. Okay. Yeah, Sumanji.
Yes.
Thank you.
So what I understood was that the free will we are talking about is actually a sign of our ego and ignorance only, because the more pure
Obviously, those are the.
We start realizing that it is not free will, it is the spiritual will.
Yeah, it's only as I said, you as you rightly said, your ego is the limiting factor. When you are operating through that ego, that itself is a limiting factor. Your knowledge is a limiting factor. Your experiences are limiting factors. So you can only operate within that limiting factors. Ramchandranji says, highly loaded chapter, lot to think and introspect. Yes, sir, very much so. And it's important that you read the essays on the Gita. You said you have that book. So the entire chapter is a beautiful chapter. And that's the reason why we spent almost 3 weeks on that. This is the third Friday on that. Thank you so much. Sajni ji, kindly proceed to close the session if there is no further discussion. Sajni ji. Hello. I am. I think she's not there. She's not there. We can close. Sajni ji, I'm seeing two these things now of Sajni ji here. One is unmuted also.
Okay. Yes, I'm here.
Yeah,
right.
Please kindly.
For a little while, the net had gone off.
Oh, okay.
Right.
Yeah. Kindly close the session.
Okay. Thank you so much, Mr. Krishnapani ji, for being with us and completing our 10th chapter. Really, we are indeed very grateful. And thank you so much. We look forward to starting the 11th chapter. Right? So
Right.
we will do the Loka Samasta now and send out love, light to especially. Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu. Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu. Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om. Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Hari Om.
Thank you.